Hauntings of Forgotten by Godzineshka on AO3. Chapter 3. We already established that Midoriya Zuko of this world has an uncanny lack of survival instinct. It shouldn't come as a surprise then that when walking down the alley behind a shopping mall around 6 p.m, when he spotted a hooded figure, he followed them. And when the individual stepped through a dark gate, instead of turning back as anyone else would do, the kid instead followed right through. The stronger his quirk got, the more his recklessness grew, which was probably appropriate seeing how, so far, he hadn't seen any consequences of his lack of survival awareness, and wouldn't anytime soon. It was ironic to an extent. Bakugo Katsuki grew convinced he's the best, that he can do no wrong because he has a powerful quirk. He didn't even remember the green-haired boy who stopped him from picking on other kids countless times. Showered with attention, the boy couldn't be any different than Midoriya, yet they shared one distinct feature. None really cared for the world around and its rules. Katsuki because he was convinced the world would bend backward to make him succeed. Zuko because the world didn't seem to pay him any attention at all. Surprisingly, the boy didn't fall right into someone on the other side, though after looking around it was pretty obvious why. Even though they seemed to be in a bar, there was only the hooded individual and a black misty man there. "Did you get what you needed, Shigaraki?" "Yeah." And then the person Zuko followed went behind the counter, moving up the stairs to his room, which Midoriya quickly learned by following the boy, an idea already forming in his mind. He smiled, feeling a buzz of excitement at his plan. Because, you see, Midoriya never really grew, just like Bakugo didn't realize his mistake for years to come, until around the second year of UA, to be precise. Because none had been given any real feedback on their actions, none helped to better themselves, and so both of them stayed painfully ignorant towards the rules of the real world. One vain, stepping on everyone, and lost in a fantasy he would one day realize isn't as easy to achieve as it seemed. The other, mischievous, subconsciously hoping to break the curse of being forgotten and finally be noticed by the world, the perfect lie and the brutal truth. But back to this strange, broken reality Midoriya of this universe lives in. Izuku looked around the room curiously. He was going to check how the suspicious teen will react to a sudden haunting, and how forgotten will affect people when they think the green-haired boy is actually a ghost rather than a person. Checking who exactly this weird individual is will be a nice bonus too, since the whole using a warp gate to travel, seemingly abandoned yet so well kept bar, yeah, it spelled trouble. And Izuku was always up for trouble. The first day he learned that Shigaraki was a fan of computer games and where the bar is. Returning home thankfully didn't take Midoriya long thanks to the night trains. Funnily enough, because of the hopping into a random black hole situation, he ended up coming home earlier than usual. And since he had some spare time, he got one of his spare notebooks out. And that is how Hauntings of Forgotten number 1 came to be. It gave Izuku so many new ideas. Shigaraki had a vague feeling he was being watched, but it was nothing new. He was a bit paranoid because of his desire to do everything perfectly, as his savior wanted, even if Sensei assured him he was doing great. But the thing is, lately things have been out of place. It began subtly enough. His phone was placed at a different angle than Shigaraki left it. He always put it near his bed when going to sleep, parallel to himself, but when he got up it was perpendicular to him, which, while strange because it never happened before, could have just been him pushing it in his sleep. His clothes appearing in different spots than he left them at, it could have been him forgetting where he actually put them, kurogiri, or even them simply falling or something. And while he's pretty sure his console was more to the left an hour ago, it isn't a reason to overreact. So Shigaraki steadily ignores all of those tiny strange happenings, deciding that he might simply be going crazy, if he isn't already after that day, when he sees a small note on the desk. A stick-on yellow kind with a simple "Hi" message written on it. Shigaraki has half a mind to go question Kurogiri about it, but then decides against it. Maybe it's a test from Sensei? After thinking about his options for a bit, he takes his pen, quickly scribbling down, "Who are you?" under the message. He leaves the note where it is and goes on with his day, training with combat professionals Sensei got for him and using his free time to play games. He's about to go to the bed when he glances at his desk and notices the yellow note. He isn't sure what he's expecting, but a new one with "Ghost" isn't it. Instead of feeling some sense of unease or maybe even fear, Shigaraki smiled crookedly. It feels like some kind of special event has been unlocked, just for him. But what answer should he choose to get the most of this strange quest? "So you're haunting me? Why?" is what he settles on before going to sleep. When he wakes up, the answer is already there, but the first note is gone. Existing forgotten by the world is boring, so why not? Which, of course, made Shigaraki very proud of himself. Because he remembers, he isn't like the rest of the world. He knows that there's a ghost in his room, one that seemingly no one else knows about. He mentions the ghost to Sensei, who plays into what he perceives as no more than his student's imagination. By this point, there are no sticky notes left on his desk, which of course makes Midoriya feel even more untouchable, because when Izuku first learnt about Sensei, he got a bit worried. That man was dangerous, in a different way than Izuku was used to. It wasn't someone the boy ever wanted to cross paths with, but just observing from the side was fine as long as he wouldn't be noticed, right? While All For One might rule the deepest parts of hell known as the underground, even with all the resources and people to his name, he didn't know everything. There were individuals capable of hiding from him, and All For One himself had to actively make himself known as little as possible. Being found out by heroes was an unwanted outcome after all, but the forgotten boy had no such problems. He could dive as deep as he wanted to see everything the underground tried to hide. He was as good as dead for the world, and what use is there in silencing the dead? Izuku wasn't planning on stalking Eraserhead or anything. He was just curious, and his hauntings of forgotten won't fill itself in, you know? And as informative as his outings to the bar Shigaraki resides in is, it's important to check things on more than one specimen. Well, that sounded wrong. Anyway, Eraserhead, or Aizawa, how his students in UA refer to him, lived alone, and while he has no pets, he had both some cat food and a tabby cat outside his building, very happy to see him. Not surprisingly, the insides of the apartment were a bare minimum, plus a lot of papers on the coffee table in the salon. After a quick glance, it was obvious those were some essays to grade. Izuku decided to push them slightly to a side while the man was in the kitchen, making himself a coffee, as dark as it gets. Then Midoriya moved to the corner of the room and sat there, watching Eraserhead inside the room, put his coffee down and reach for one of the papers before promptly freezing. The man then got up and checked the whole apartment, first for signs of forced entry, then for all possible hiding spots. His eyes landed in the corner Izuku was in once or twice, but they weren't read and just glanced over the boy. After checking everything, Aizawa sighed and sat down. He started grading papers, but he would glance up from time to time. At some point, Izuku left his corner and ended up standing just behind the man, glancing at the essays, reading them curiously. Those are works of students in UA, Hero course after all. The place he wants to go to the most. Well, he can visit whenever he wants to, but still, he's dreaming of attending it the right way. It's an impossible dream, but What does it hurt when giving up would break him into pieces? Eraserhead is quick and merciless in his grading, but not unfair. Soon enough he finishes and just lays down on the couch he was earlier sitting on and closes his eyes. Izuku waits for a few minutes for the man's breathing to even out before walking around and reaching for the empty cup to bring it to the sink. Since he's already intruding, he might as well do something nice rather than just... Izuku makes an undignified sound, something along the lines of "eep," and actually trips over the table, falling backward with the cup held tightly to his chest. But unlike one might expect, he isn't a total madman, and instead of just watching, he also learnt a lot, so he safely rolls and ends up in a low crouch, giving a sheepish smile to a very unamused Aizawa, man's eyes already red. "You were fake sleeping," the boy notes, slowly getting up and then a step back. "You heard the cup being lifted." "What are you even doing here, kid?" Eraserhead asked, raising to a sitting position, but not going after the child. It would be counterproductive, really. Before he figures out a way to stop forgetting and make others remember too, even if he managed to take the boy to the police station, it won't do jack shit. "Well," the boy said, slowly putting the cup down on the table and then reaching for his small black backpack, "I've been experimenting." Aizawa leaned a bit forward to see what was written on the notebook. It wasn't easy in the dim light of the room. "Hauntings of Forgotten?" he inquired out loud, raising an eyebrow. He both wanted to make sure he got it right and hoped for some kind of explanation. "Yep. Since no one pays attention to me, I can move things around all I want and make people think they are being haunted by a ghost," the boy explained before promptly pouting. "Unless you're already focusing on the item and, by an extent, notice me when I move it." "Then you shouldn't," Aizawa stated. "But," the boy said, completely ignoring the input of the man, "it's a good thing to know. If someone is in a state of high awareness of their surroundings, and I interact with those, they will most likely notice me. I'll need to check it on someone else, though, too, since you're the only person with the Quirk of Erasure type, at least that I know of." "Can't you do experiments that don't consist of breaking into people's houses?" "Well, technically I walked inside with you, so it wasn't really a forced entry. It isn't my fault you didn't notice me, you know. My quirks? Yes. But it's passive, so yeah, I'm innocent." "No, you aren't, and you know it." The boy shrugged. "Did you know there's a new drug ring rising in the north part of Hosu?" "Yes, I do. And did you know that you need safer hobbies than actively looking for new drug rings?" "Well, I'd say I'd look for them passively, but the bigger point is that I have normal teenage hobbies too." Aizawa sighed, fully expecting an even less normal answer for pastime activity than lurking in the underground. "Like?" he inquired, deciding to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. "I like collecting hero merch, and analysing quirks." Razorhead blinked. While the first was painfully average, which was a good thing all things considered, the other one was somewhat normal but quite interesting. "Then you should make notes on them rather than haunting people." Aizawa didn't like the smug grin that appeared on the boy's face, but he was admittedly curious why the kid started looking around at his backpack again. "I actually do. I have the 12 written out already," the boy explained, putting the Hauntings of Forgotten one away and then proudly bringing out Hero Analysis for the Future number 12, after which he hesitated for a moment. "If you promised not to try grabbing it or me, I can show you my notes." Since trying to catch the kid wouldn't do much as of now, and Aizawa wasn't really one to steal things from children, unlike the impression most people on the streets get from him, he gave a small nod, but since it didn't seem enough for the boy, he added an out-loud answer. "Promise." And with that, the kid didn't waste any time taking a spot on the couch and opening the notebook on one of the earlier pages, showing what might not be the peak of art, but a functional sketch of one of the new heroes, Hawks. As Eraserhead read through the notes, the kid started talking animatedly, expanding on some of his thought shortcuts written down. Aizawa couldn't help but go into his teacher mode, pointing out parts that could be improved and offering constructive criticism. The kid took it in stride, actually noting finer points on his phone. Overall, it isn't a bad analysis for someone your age. I assume you didn't have anyone to exchange thoughts with? The man asked at one point, and the child beamed, seemingly knowing him well enough to realize how high of praise it actually was. Nope. So if it's fine with you, can we do it again? I know you're busy. I can help with some cases too. I'm actually quite curious of the other notebooks, and I'm not busy to the point where I need a literal child to help with investigations. But I would rather set a time for this than have you appearing in my apartment whenever you want. It's not like you're going to remember it, though, Izuku pointed out. But I remember my schedule and know when I would have time to go over your analysis. Aizawa answered readily and then got a brilliant idea. Something he would never think of doing in normal circumstances, but the current ones were nothing if not unusual. It might be good to show some of them to Nezu. The kid actually jumped up in excitement, a huge smile that was nothing short of blinding directed at the poor man. Really? Do you mean that? I mean, I thought about writing to him, but he's a busy creature, so even if he didn't instantly ignore it, I don't really want to waste his time with my half-baked analysis. For some reason, Aizawa had the distinct feeling the kid didn't mean the principal's public email. I'm sure that if you mentioned that you're the new vigilante that no one can remember, he'll be more than happy to share your message, and I'm confident he'll want to work with you on your analysis. All right, I'll write to him, the boy stated, clenching his hands into fists in determination, but his face quickly grew into a more hesitant expression. I can still talk with you about my notes though, right? Sure, problem child. Preferably on Friday afternoon around 5 p.m. And that's how Aizawa became Izuku's favourite human. You can't remember distinct features and instead have vague ideas of various aspects of this vigilante. You tried recording, but the sound of his speech gets lost in the noise of the city, as if the recorder was deciphering their words as one of those, which means their quirk also influences technology, but isn't sure to what extent. Nezu sure looked like he was going crazy with the speed of both his speech and the writing on the whiteboard. The marker made squeaky sounds as if yelling for mercy, since it wasn't made with such acceleration in mind. It was no surprise the principal was going through dozens of markers within days. Yes, Aizawa answered simply, and the mammal promptly continued. But whatever you tell Sakuchi, he remembers, or at the very least more than he would if he met the vigilante in person. The written details stay too. Additionally, the messages they send me, while quite informative, are always very easy to overlook or forget, especially after already had been read. What more? I can never get to hacking the IP. Whenever I sit down with such an idea in mind, I can't help but hyper-focus on other jobs at hand, and one time I actually managed to, but after finding the address I instantly forgot about it, as if it was a case already closed and therefore unimportant to keep in mind. Part of Aizawa thought, what a terrifying quirk. But the rest of him seemed already used to it. Once again, he couldn't help but feel like he had all the answers they needed, but just outside of his reach. He hummed, and it was all the principal needed to continue. The deduction is quite easy to make, the mammal said happily, circling part of his scribbles. Honestly, Aizawa wouldn't be able to decipher them, even if given far more time and coffee. As long as we don't know exactly who our dear vigilante is, we keep our memories. But if we get too close, our minds seem to not as much delete as redirect our knowledge, which in long term makes us subconsciously dispose of this information, finding it unimportant. What a complex power it is. Did you ever ask them what exactly is their quirk? Aizawa inquired, and the mammal put his marker down, scrambling to take a seat behind his desk, pulling a few files out. Yes, they call it forgotten, and describe it as a passive ability that makes people not only pay no mind to them, unless they actively catch their attention, but additionally, after the exchange is done, most people forget all about them. Most people? Aizawa inquired, knowing that it was a key element that the principal probably wouldn't share if the man didn't directly ask about. Yes, 2 people keep their memories of our dear vigilante to a certain extent, that is. One of them being their mother, who is reminded of her child whenever she sees them, while the other is you. Aizawa raised his eyebrows skeptically. I'm fairly certain I would know if I remembered them, he noted, although part of him wasn't so quick to dismiss this possibility for some reason. That is because, according to them, you only remember after using your quirk on them. After that, you remember all previous interactions, which is quite interesting, Nezu said, noting the key parts on a paper he then gave to Aizawa. Thankfully, it was written in scribbles that could be deciphered far easier than whatever monstrosity was that thing on the whiteboard. Because shouldn't it mean that whenever you use your quirk, everyone who had met the boy should remember? But if they actually do, does the memory stay at the back of their minds and they pay no attention? Or, unlike you, do they permanently forget about the vigilante? If because of their quirk people paid near to no attention to them, even if someone remembers there's not much reference in the first place, Aizawa noted, although Nezu probably already had made this connection at least 5 times by now. But what about those who had more meaningful encounters with them? The principal inquired, very obviously happy about this chance of discussing an extremely strange quirk with his past student. There's another part I'm quite interested in. The mother of the vigilante may lack awareness of their presence as anyone else, but, unlike them, she remembers moments they shared. Why is that? I believe it is because of how important a part of her life it was. It should be strange to completely lose the memory of raising an offspring after all. And going by this logic, if the vigilante made a big enough impact upon his first introduction, it would be possible for the other person to remember them to a certain extent. Wouldn't then people they caught and saved remember? That's the thing. They do remember, don't they? From what I understand, it isn't that their presence is erased completely, it is barely brought to as little meaning as possible in our minds, which means that all those people remember both being saved and by a vigilante, rather than heroes. But do you think it is important that this specific vigilante was the one who saved them? Similarly, the criminals will keep in mind being defeated by an unknown figure, and focus on emotion rather than the vigilante. If bested by someone they heard of, they might be able to pay it more mind and importance, but since it is an unknown factor, they just keep on feeding into their bitterness, forgetting who stands behind it. Nezu talked animatedly, very obviously deeply interested in the subject. So far it sounds like it's impossible to remember the problem child, Aizawa noticed, and the principal froze for a moment, like a deer caught in headlights. It was a strange thing to witness. The principal was quiet for a moment, thousands of calculations going through his mind. It shouldn't be the case, he began, far more slowly than before, and leaned back on his chair. In a world of quirks, such a thing as impossibility does not have any right of existing. As strange as this case might be, it cannot be unsolvable. Maybe Aizawa would feel better about the situation was it not for the fact that the principal wasn't happy and excited anymore, which was strange. The principal loved a good puzzle, and this situation certainly was hard to solve. It's sad, the man decided to comment, prompting Nezu to share his real thoughts on the matter. Yes, the creature admitted readily, his tone slower and quieter than it normally is. Being completely forgotten by the world around. I can imagine how it feels. Forced quiet by your own quirk. Tragic, isn't it? Contrary to what some people believe, the principal didn't become a principal to prove a point or even to get power. He genuinely cared for the younger generations, hoping to teach them the kindness that would not let anyone, a person or animal, be hurt by greedy monsters some of the humans were. And with his tragic backstory, he felt a sense of companionships with the individuals that society shunned out or hurt. But being forgotten like this vigilante was, it reminded him of dark days when His voice was worth nothing, treated like a strange animal, specimen to be studied, his screams ignored by this cruel, cruel world. But what if even the world itself forgets you? What is left for you then? Neither Nezu nor Aizawa knew or really wanted to know. But unlike one might expect, but unlike one the boy explained before promptly. The kid took it in stride, actually noting finger points on his phone. Finger points, oh my word. I'm trying to figure out what my Nezu voice should be. It's kind of like this in the dubbed anime. Oh,